What's going on, Empire Builders? I am super pumped today because we have my good friend, Ryan Robinson. Ryan, what's going on?
I'm happy to be here, man. It's a beautiful gray day in San Francisco.
That's funny, man. I'm here in SoCal myself and it's still cloudy for some reason. I don't understand that. We're supposed to be by the beach, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Keep
So,
dreaming, I guess.
so listen, everyone. I'm super excited because Ryan has done some pretty impressive stuff. Ryan has built a $160,000 marketing freelance business. He writes for Forbes, Entrepreneur. He's got his own blog over at ryrob.com with ridiculously in-depth content. He is the host of the Side Hustle Project podcast and has his own collection of digital products. And if that wasn't enough, he was able to do all of these things while working a full-time job. So I know you side hustling entrepreneurs out there are really, really going to love this show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about just that. Number one, side hustling, and then number two, some client acquisition strategies, how you got your first clients, and now how you're getting your clients today. So I think everyone is going to really benefit from this. So I know I gave you a quick intro, but maybe in your own words, you can kind of share with people kind of where you were before you started your business and what kind of made you want to get into doing your own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, God, if we're gonna go back to my first business, when I started that in college, it was around this really, juvenile, funny product idea that I called the iStash, and it was an iPhone lookalike, hide your anything device, doing some air quotes, because really it was designed to fit a lighter and cigarette-shaped objects to go into like music festivals. This was a time when I went to college in Orange County, so we would go to Coachella and like all these different festivals, concerts. So that was kind of like my first learning lesson as far as business goes. I ended up losing about $6,500 on that at the end of the day. And this is something we were talking about on our interview for my podcast, was like, you're building something that people don't actually want. And that was a lesson that, was driven into the core of me, both through like the public embarrassment side of things, because like I had, told everybody about this awesome product, like how it's going to do all these cool things for me and like help people sneak goods into concerts. And, turns out not that many people wanted it, or at least wanted it for the price point that I had to sell it at. So
Right.
that was kind of, my first lesson in business. And then, fast forwarding to graduating from college, I got a job in marketing, and I really stuck with marketing and sort of learned all the different types of, content marketing, inbound marketing, SEO, like all the different buzzwords that sort of play into what marketing has become today. And, pretty much right away after I started my first full-time job, I began freelancing on the side. And, it wasn't something I took very seriously at the time because I had my job. I kind of just wanted to build a little bit more of a portfolio for myself. And, that's when I started my blog also and began sort of talking about lessons from business, things I'm learning in marketing. And yeah, it kind of just took off from there. And now that's what I'm doing full time, is freelance content marketing.
Awesome, man. That's such a cool story. And it's funny you talk about the iStash, and I know you and I had conversations about that in the past. I think we were in college almost roughly the same time, and maybe even a couple cities apart and not even realize it.
Mm-hmm.
But I would have loved something like that. Me and my friends would sneak cigarettes into concerts all the time. And yeah, I remember seeing that. I was like, that thing's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
I love that story, man. Yeah, what I think is interesting about you as well is you decided to pretty much go into freelancing. I mean, it's pretty much side by side with your full-time job. A lot of people, don't typically do that. So what was it about
Mm-hmm.
freelancing or owning your own business that, really appealed to you?
Oh man. So for me, the first appeal was making extra money. And I could say that like at the time I was like, yeah, I eventually want to be a full-time consultant. But primarily speaking, like I just wanted to make extra money. Like my very first job paid me, I think like $35,000 doing like, marketing manager type stuff. And
Yeah.
I would go to trade shows and like do a little bit of sales. So there was like the promise of, commission on any sales I generated,
Mhm.
but that was more or less pipe dream type stuff. So from the money perspective, like I was living in Newport Beach at the time, and it's not a really cheap place to live as far as like, where the majority of 22-year-olds can afford right out of college. And
Yeah,
so
35 a
it was
year in
all table to
Newport
mouth.
is, yeah, 35 a year in Newport's like,
Oh, hilarious. Yeah. So that was kind of, that was the impetus for me. And, I definitely had to learn my way into sort of the legal aspect of running something on the side that, may or may not have a little bit of crossover to what you do in your day job.
mhm.
And I just recently published a crazy interview with an attorney talking about side hustle law 101. And we go over basically all the dumb things I did. To make a long story short, I got like a cease and desist email from a
Wow.
previous employer one time that was like,
Jeez.
hey, we saw you're doing this business now, and it competes with something that we see ourselves going into. And so you can read and listen all about that insane story
Yeah,
on
I'm
my
gonna for sure
blog.
link to
But
that below the video. People need to know about that stuff for sure.
oh yeah, and I mean it was a constant learning process, and I was lucky that nothing actually came about legally speaking. But still, like I ended up spending $500 to $1,000 putting an attorney on retainer who would like help me through the process of talking this out, basically. So these kinds of things can be costly if you don't approach them the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you here to do this masterclass was to share with my audience some of the things they should be, concerned about or at least know about while they're side hustling in their marketing business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say specifically on the marketing type stuff, if you do marketing for your day job and you want to do marketing as your side hustle, freelancing, freelance writing, freelance content marketing, whatever that term actually is, if there is even a chance that it could compete directly with the types of clients that your day job works with. So like if you do marketing for, real estate agents at your day job, you definitely cannot go out and try and land real estate clients for yourself. That would for sure, call it gray area, but that would for sure not be a good idea.
Yeah.
And so like when you're dealing with stuff that's questionable like this, I always say it's worth a couple $100 to talk to an attorney for an hour. But general rule of thumb is like, is this something that, one, violates any of my current agreements with my employer? And two, is it something that they could view as competition to, either the current business or somewhere where they might be in the future? So
Right.
there's a little bit of that, guessing game with like trying to determine whether or not this is something that your employers might be moving towards in the future too.
Yeah, and I know every state and every country is very different, but in California, where we both are, I thought there was like a no compete clause they have in contracts, right?
Yeah, so non-compete contracts are or non-compete clauses rather, are pretty common within employment contracts in California. There's a precedent actually that says they are void in the state of California. So there's, technically no legal standing as far as non-competes go in California. But I think if you Google which states non-compete clauses are enforced in, there's like a very clear Wikipedia breakdown list of like, these are all the states where the state Supreme Court has ruled in favor of an employer in the case of non-competes. And so, you have to know your regulations based on where you are. But even still, like, it's not great getting a threatening email.
Yeah, and even if you are allowed to compete, they can still just fire you for whatever reason they want to, and you're out of a job now.
Right.
So
right,
yeah, I think
you're probably an at-will employee, which means anytime there's just cause to get rid of you, then you're out.
Right. Okay, well, so let's assume that someone's just working a job that isn't related to marketing. They have a sales job, or they're doing something else. They don't really love it, and they know they want to do digital marketing. What steps would you say to that person to take first to, I guess, one, make sure they're separating their full-time job and their side hustle, and then two, any things that you maybe did wrong that they can avoid?
Ooh, yeah. So in the past, I have a mixed record with talking to my boss about a side hustle versus not talking to my boss about a side hustle. And I think, personally speaking, what I did in the case that I felt like it was the smart decision to talk to my boss was I first looked through all my employment agreements, like literally everything I signed, to see if there is an actual policy on employees having side businesses. And there was not. There was not something that was like clearly spelled out, which is a good thing. And so then I, asked around, like basically wanted to just get a feel for like, all right, does anyone else have side projects here? Like, is there some sort of like informal policy? And when I saw that a couple of other people had worked on like unrelated projects on the side, then I made the decision to talk to my boss about it. And, in my mind, like I had built it up as like this huge conversation, like, oh shit, am I going to get fired? Like, what do I got to prepare before this? Like, should I save everything on my personal computer? Like all these things that I'm thinking about going into this conversation. And my boss was like, yeah, man, that's cool. Don't even worry about it. And I was like, okay. And so, we kind of like talked through like what I needed to do in order to make sure it wouldn't ever cross over, and I think that's kind of like going to be pretty customized based on, what you do and what your boss says. But I personally feel like you have nothing to lose. Like in 90% of cases, you're not going to get fired if there's not a clear policy against it. So if anything, like getting out ahead of it and disclosing what you want to do and like really taking the time to sell them and show them how it's not going to affect your work, it's not going to affect their business, is the way to go. Because that's a hell of a lot better than if like, you're Facebook friends with your boss or a coworker and they see you posting about this side project, and then they're going to be like, they're going to be on the offensive or defensive rather. Like they're going to be like, oh my God, what is this? Tell us about this. And so disclosing up front is if your agreements are all clear and you have a thumbs up, like that's the way to go.
Okay. That's incredibly good advice. And again, you're being transparent is obviously helpful. And because you have commitments to them, you have to honor those. And I that's why I brought you on. I love that you have this experience. Me personally, I never had a full-time job. I was actually in college and working part-time jobs while I was getting my business off the ground. And in college, because you're the only one who, is responsible for the outcomes, I was really distracted. I was focused on my business during class. Like instead of paying attention, I'd be like learning. It was, I was taking business law. It's funny, we're talking about some law right now. Maybe I should have paid a little bit better attention. But I was like deep diving on how I do digital marketing, how I do these other things that they weren't teaching me. So yeah, I think, what you said there is important because you have clear expectations with this full-time job. You need to make sure you work with your boss, management, or whoever to make them feel comfortable. You're not going to neglect those duties.
Yeah. And it needs to be an ongoing conversation, really. Like, and, don't give them any reason. Like I've done some stupid shit, honestly, like with a side project, like, this was actually even when I was at Creative Live, and they did not love that I did this, was I did the marketing for the business classes at Creative Live. And so I got asked to do a podcast interview by someone, and they wanted to talk about both what I did at Creative Live and what I do on my blog. So there was like this gray area of like crossover, and I, in retrospect, made the mistake of scheduling that podcast recording during work hours. And so like, someone like a boss or maybe my boss's boss saw me, with a microphone, like recording this podcast interview during lunch, mind you, in one of the meeting spaces, which, is technically Creative Live property. And that resulted in a conversation, at least. It wasn't like a... don't do that again, you'll be fired kind of conversation. But it was the conversation of like, hey, what was that for? We know you've got, your blog and your freelance stuff you're doing. Like, was that for something outside of work? And then it just sort of put me in a position where I had to explain like, no, we were talking about, both Creative Live and a little bit about what I did too. And so with as far as like the gray area stuff goes, like don't work on your side project during company hours, lesson learned. Don't use company equipment, lesson learned, and just be smart. Like think twice about whether or not what you're doing could be a potential, mistake.
Right. Right. That's really great advice. And before we dive too much into talking about customer acquisition, which I think what a lot of people are interested in, I'm curious about your perspective on when's the right time to pursue your side hustle full time. I know you, are probably far more patient than the average person, and you did all of these really incredible things while you still had a full-time job. I think a lot of people would be the opposite of that. And the second their business made them just that extra money, like, oh, I'm just going to go all in, which isn't always the best thing to do. And I was probably in between those two extremes.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about your perspective. Like, when would be a good time, or what should people ask themselves first before they make that leap to doing their business full time?
Well, my opinion on this question is shaped by experience because, you mentioned like, yes, at the beginning, like I did build up my most recent freelance business to about 160K in revenue before I quit my job. And so that's the ideal. That's like the gold standard.
That's awesome.
I mean, who really does that? Not very many people, right?
I don't know anyone. Yeah.
And that me doing that this way this time was shaped by right after college, starting a business with one of my best friends and a roommate at the time. And, we started working on this project together. It was called Case Escape. It was like a custom phone case printing machines.
Yeah.
And it's still around today. Like my former partner rather, is still doing it. But basically, like, we launched this business, saw the first sign of traction, like, oh my God, we made $2,000 the first month. Like, oh, this is just taken off. There's no way it's not going to go crazy. And so, about a month or two after we started the business together, like, we both quit our day jobs and, the growth plateaued. And we had this holy shit moment of like, two people, the business is making $5,000 a month tops. There's no way we can survive, especially because at the early days, we want to reinvest in the business so it doesn't implode. And so we both basically had to move home and live with our parents, mine in Central California, Cowtown, USA, and my partner, Matt, in Philadelphia, way on the East Coast. So we basically put ourselves in this position where we had to cut costs crazy amount in order to even keep the business alive. So, to me, my experience of when should you quit your day job is shaped by a lot of scars. And I personally have a rule. This is the rule I've followed every single time since then, that my side income needs to be up to at least 75% of what my day job is paying me. And I get that number as sort of a function of like, how much is my cost of living? So I'm okay to like cut my lifestyle down a little bit as I jump full time because, it's necessary. It's smart to do. But at the same time, like, I don't want to cut out everything and have to be in this position again where you're like, you're scrambling to bring in more revenue. Because when you're in that position, when you're scrambling, when you're like, the scarcity mindset, the things that you do will just naturally not be the best sort of activities that you can put in. So that's my take on it. It's kind of different for everyone. Like, I've got one friend that his side business makes like 150% of what his day job pays him. And like, for him, he likes the healthcare that comes from his day job. And, he's got a family with 2 kids. So like, for him, that makes sense. His wife doesn't work. So you kind of got to like assess your individual unique situation. And, if you're willing to drop your living costs down to, as close to zero as you can get them, in order to focus on a side project that has traction already, then that's your prerogative. But at the same time, like, you don't want the stress of where your next meal is coming from or where your next month's rent is coming from. So that's what you want to avoid.
Awesome, man. Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of the viewers can relate, and I definitely can, being there and at a point where you're like, oh, I got, a couple of clients, it's going great. And then you lose one, you're like, oh, I'm screwed. I have to go get a job again. So you don't want that to be devastating. But what I love about you, and I think where you and I are very similar, and I hope people can learn from this, is you didn't give up. after iStash didn't go the way you planned it, or Case Escape didn't go the way you planned it. You persisted, even if you had to move in back with your parents for a time. And I guess maybe just for a moment, speak to that. What would you say to the person who wants to give up at it, or who just is failing or not getting any traction?
I mean, honestly, I feel like when you're pushing up against barriers and you're not getting traction, or you're getting a lot of no's from people, like, you have to assess what you're doing that's not working. And that's really hard to do. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
like, what I do is I have an accountability partner who, kind of view him as like a mentor in some ways. He's someone who's been through a lot of similar business related experiences. And he and I check in every week with each other. We have like goals that we work towards. We will ping each other like, hey, how you doing on this project, if we haven't heard about it in a week or two. But find that person who you trust their feedback, they have experience that you admire, and make them a person that can give you that, that tough truth when you
Yeah.
need to hear it. Because sometimes you could just be pushing up against a barrier, and the solution is right in front of you, or like right around the corner. Like, maybe you just need to talk to the right kind of people. You could be pitching the wrong people for your
Right.
services. And I think, the difference between deciding to pivot and focus on something new, or like quit and go to a completely new direction, or go completely back to a full-time job, is a very, very fine line for most people when they're not experiencing, like the feeling of instant results. So
Yeah.
I always say, like, lean on feedback from other people.
And I love that. And
Take it
that's
with a grain of
really
salt.
why, yeah, and it's really why I started the Laptop Empire Lab, was because
Mm.
I knew when I was able to start learning from people who were just a few steps ahead of me in their business, I was able to more quickly overcome challenges and barriers, because I could learn from them and see that it's possible. I wasn't sitting at my computer banging my head against the wall, but I saw the people at the next level, and they were willing to help me if I just asked the right questions. So that's
Totally.
big. That's big. So let's move on to now client acquisition. This is what people are really interested in. We'll kind of break it down into two parts. First part is, how were you getting your first clients when you were just starting out? Let's start there.
Oh, this is my favorite, because like, for me, it was such a natural progression. And I think that's like a really important lesson. So like, going back to my most recent foray into beginning to freelance, which is, I would say my best. So I had, to quickly address my first time trying out freelancing, right after college, I went to the sites like Upwork and Odesk and, Fiverr, and that was all shit. Like, the clients are so bad there that you're just naturally not going to be able to get great projects. So wrap that up. Quit doing that now. And I think, when I look forward to what I did my second time starting to freelance, like, it was such a connected experience to everything that I was doing in my day job. So at Creative Live, I started to work with all these people that were like New York Times bestselling authors, a lot of like entrepreneurs, investors, people that are like crazy, crazy connected. And I would do things that provided value to them, both for my day job and then also on my personal blog, which is where my client acquisition really comes into play. So as a part of my day job, it's just an understood that I was going to help all these people market their classes. But as a part of what I wanted to do above and beyond that, like, first of all, genuinely interested in these people. Like, I liked them. I had a cool time getting to meet them. Like, I wanted to build a relationship with, the people like Noah Kagan and like Ramit Sethi, Tim Ferriss, like
That's
all these
awesome.
huge names. Like, just got to meet them coming through, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And, going down the line, like what I did on my blog as sort of a long-term acquisition strategy, I wasn't thinking this was like gonna net me business tomorrow. But over the course of the year after quitting Creative Live, I was able to take some of the blog posts I compiled, like just reaching out to these people, grabbing quotes from them about, asking them about what their best piece of business advice is, and little things like that. I would compile blog posts on my personal blog and like put in a ton of time and effort to get like thousands of social shares on all these and get like some social proof, get my audience engaged so that there's comments on the blog post, like all these all these metrics that say, this blog post is the shit, basically.
Right.
And then I would hit these people up that I quoted for it, and I'd say, hey, check this post out. And my God, like, honestly, like out of the 20 or so that started from Creative Live, I've been able to work with 3 or 4 of them in just the year since then. And one of them is honestly my best freelance client today.
And that's from you featuring them in content and then showing that to them as, hey, look what this cool thing I did for you. And that kind of opens the door a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like for some of the bigger fish, like Tim Ferriss in particular, I wasn't able to like get a custom quote from him. And so I just found a quote that looked like it fit from his book. And, I don't even know if it was anywhere online. So it was kind of unique to being online, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And I featured it like front and center in the article and, hit him up after the article published. He liked it. Hasn't turned into any work yet, but it might. But that's kind of the process. Like I did that one by one, and that's what I continue to do. So I'll feature, people, companies, brands, like products, like anyone that I could see as a potential client someday, I'll feature in blog posts of mine. And then I'll reach out just to let them know about the feature, not like pitching them today on like, hire me, hire me, hire me. Just like, I want to give you a preview of what I can do by featuring you. And that sort of gets the foot in the door too.
That's such a cool strategy, man. And I love it because it's similar to something that I talk about a lot, which is content partnerships. You said there in the beginning, what you did first was provide upfront value to these people. Now, in some cases, people, they do trials for their clients, which isn't great because you're almost giving away your whole service for free. But if you can do something else that creates value in their world, shows them what you're capable of, they're going to be a lot more willing and excited to work with you. You and I teamed up on an infographic, and more recently, a friend, Charles Bird, I did an infographic for him. And because he loved it so much, he invited to have me come on his team for his launch to help do some content for his launch. Yeah. And he's introduced me to a handful of people he knows that he knew would love that kind of work too. So yeah, but what I like about what you're doing is you're not even asking for permission. You're writing incredibly, detailed, beneficial content, putting them in there, and then just telling them, hey, look at this thing I did for you. And you're not really even asking. So I love that strategy, man. And would you say that's what you were doing in the beginning as well as what you do today? Like that's end-to-end what you've been up to?
That's still I would say that's still my most effective client acquisition strategy because it's such a long-term play. Like it still plays out over time, like it's like some of the people I hit up when I first featured them in my post, like they immediately wrote back and they were like, hey, like, oh, this is really cool. We should find a way to work together. Some of them panned out, some haven't yet. And so like, I'm always staying in touch with these people, continuing to provide more value. So like, since then I've began writing for Forbes, Entrepreneur, Business Insider, like a lot of these sites. And so I'll sort of like rotate around. Like when I'm writing a new piece, I'll be thinking in the back of my mind, like, who's a good fit to feature for this that I might be able to work with one day. And so I continue like peppering these people with value basically. And it's like, once I cross a certain threshold, they're going to be like, okay, how do we do like something together? Especially if I'm able to drive results for them.
Right.
And there is an element of talking about other client acquisition strategies. I do some cold outreach, but it's usually not very cold. Like I usually know some sort of like mutual connection that works at the company, or I know someone that the person is just like personally friends with or something like that. So for me, cold outreach will sometimes net results, but as far as like the allocation of my time, it's just not the best place to put it for the most part. So yeah, it's really a referrals based.
Yeah, and I agree. With my business where I'm at this point, doing cold outreach consistently isn't, a great investment of my time. But when I do it, I make sure that I have some point of, similarity. So an example is I work with a patio furniture manufacturer. They've got hundreds of retailers across the country. So I teamed up with them to do some promotions to their retailers because I knew that they had that exact audience. So it doesn't have to be, like in Forbes or something crazy like that. You're obviously have some incredible accomplishments there, but people can do it on a smaller scale and still attract the right people.
Oh, totally. Totally. And you like use your own personal blog even to do that. Like it doesn't have to be some crazy insane feature. Like if they just like the way that you highlight them, like that's a way to start a conversation. And that's what it's really about, because none of these people that I'm emailing about their feature will respond and say, okay, how do we hire you right now? It's like get them on the phone and talk about what else you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot, you and I talked about this on your podcast. A lot of times marketers who are just starting out, they try and sell the service that they do, whether it's SEO, Facebook ads, whatever. They try and sell that to every single person and just jam it down their throat instead of, having a relationship first, a conversation and an understanding of if what you do can provide them with value. And if it can't, you're wasting your time. So I think that, your way gets you more of the conversational foot in the door than already if you're leading with a sell or trying to pitch them something, they're already going to have their guard up.
Yeah. And I actually just did this. So funny you mentioned that, because I did this interview recently for my podcast with Steli Efti, who's the founder of close.io.
Oh, wow. I was just reading their site last night, actually.
He is crazy, man. Like the dude is one of the best salespeople I've ever met. And like his story is so bonkers. Like when he came, he's from Germany originally. When he first came to the US, he was super young. I think he was in his early 20s. And like his first day here, he was super tired, jet lagged, and he forced himself to go like way outside of his comfort zone and take BART up to, some startup related convention. And literally just like showed up. It was a meetup event. And because he was at this meetup event, he met Robert Scoble, who is like a really, really prolific, famous tech blogger. And was like literally just sitting next to this guy, Robert Scoble, at a meetup event. And Steli got the opportunity to grab the mic. Everyone else was giving pitches on like their startup and, why you should invest in me, why you should join my team. And Steli grabs the mic and he's like, hey man, everybody, I'm brand new here. And if anyone wants to be my friend, come talk to me after this. I don't have an idea to pitch you. I just need friends. And like, he met so many people that day that because he met them on this foundation of like just genuinely wanting to be friends, he was able to do some work with moving forward. And he found a business partner that day. So, someone who became his partner like 5 years later. So
that's awesome.
Just build actual relationships with people, and that will get them to want to care about what you're doing.
Yeah. And I think that's, the beauty of having a side hustle is you can afford to be a little more patient and invest time in relationships that it might take you a month or two longer than if you were just hitting up people cold. But the relationships last a lot longer and the clients are a lot better. So I think it's an important value for sure. So cool, man. Where can people go if they want to learn more about you and digest more of your content?
So home base for everything is ryrob.com. It's spelled RYROB. Probably most active on Twitter. I'm at the Ryan Robinson, but you'll be able to find everything and more on my blog.
Awesome. Well, listen, I am a huge fan, and everyone watching, I highly, highly recommend Ryan's content. He goes to a level of depth that most people never do. So I want to appreciate you for being here and for all the incredible content you put out, Ryan. Thank you so much, man. We'll talk soon. All right.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
Cool, man.